On this episode, we sit down with Justin and Kelly Walker, who have both experienced the tragic loss of a spouse and have since found love and marriage once again. And all of the pain, the struggles, the fear, the guilt, and the shame attached to that journey while walking it with faith and as parents of 9 children. You heard correctly, 9 children between them. So if you are wondering if it's ever possible to date or find love again, or you're dealing with the challenges of that, this episode's for you. If you're parenting and wondering, how do I take my kids through grief and loss that honors our loved one, this episode's for you. And there are so many other lessons and pieces of wisdom that Justin and Kelly have to share, and we're excited for you to get to know them. So we pray that it blesses you, and we'll see you on the other side. Enjoy. Justin, so good to see you again, my friend. And Kelly, welcome to our Good Grief Couch. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Good to be seen.
Yeah.
It's good
Oh, you guys look like the picture perfect portrait couple here right now. But we know you have 9 kids. Hey, now, how do you do it?
We a lot of prayer. We just keep praying a whole lot. That's how to do it.
And we have coined it happy chaos because it really is. It's just happy chaos.
Yeah. Sometimes more happy, sometimes more chaos.
Yes.
I'm partly jealous of your podcast name because I think that sums up the grief journey as well. It is happy chaos in different times. So
yeah.
I was just saying, this is our second time attempting to hit record on this because technical issues. We're praying on our side for the technical issues. You guys are praying for your 9 kids. Hopefully, in the mix of all of that, we've sent our baby off. We're going to get a solid 60 minutes just to have the best conversation of our week.
Excited for this.
Justin, last time we chatted on the podcast, I just want to catch up listeners who are either new to the show and got no idea who both of you are, or they've actually listened and maybe didn't realize that you're the guy that maybe they took so much away from last time. Can you remember, that was April a year ago? It doesn't feel like that long ago.
No, that's how it goes. I feel like it's like I look backward and go, was that really a year? Was that 5 years? And so definitely feel that.
And you've done a lot in the last year, which we want to tap into. There's been launches in regards to schools. There's been Love launched, and I don't know what else that we're going to find out has been launched as well. But we want to kind of, first of all, just give you guys the mic. Just in I know it's difficult. Today we want to learn about living life as a widow and then remarrying as 2 widows, but we don't want to miss the story that led up to that. So could you, in your best way possible, summarize your grief and loss story to get us to where we are today? Is that easier said than done? I'm sure it is.
I'll give you the abbreviated version, and Kelly can do the same, and then you guys can probe questions if you want to go deeper, because obviously you're compacting the last 4 years into a short time frame. But so for me personally, my wife was diagnosed with cancer in August of 2020. So height of COVID, shutdowns, life is crazy already. And she was having stomach pains. I came home one day and she was doubled over on the floor, trying to crawl across the floor. Took her to the urgent care. Actually, I took her to one urgent care. They told me it was nothing. They said she probably pulled a muscle. We like to work out a lot. And so they said, you probably pulled a muscle, go home. And again, because it was COVID, they didn't want to do x-rays. They didn't want to do stuff because they were just trying to get us out of there. So, pain didn't go away for about a week. Take her a week later, took her to the ER. And right there in the ER, they said they needed to do a CT scan and then came in the room. We weren't there a half hour, and a half hour later, they were walking in and saying that your wife has stage 4 cancer. And I didn't really know what that meant, to be completely honest. I knew that there were stages, and I knew stage 4 was the worst. I didn't exactly know, what that meant in the cancer world, what stage 4 meant, but meaning that it's terminal and inoperable, that her cancer was inoperable. It was terminal. And we asked them, how long? And they said, if we did everything that they said, maybe possibly they could get us 2 years. But even that's of no guarantee. And so she made it from that point. She began to deteriorate. We tried natural things for healing, and we tried conventional things. So we did the naturopath things, and we also did the chemotherapy route. And surgery was never an option. And they advised against any sort of a surgery because it would just be a quality of life issue at that point. If you only have a year left, do you want to spend half of that in recovery? And so, and again, they were inoperable. She had 27 tumors in her abdomen. The main one was 4 centimeters on her colon, but then her abdomen and liver were full. So hers was colon cancer metastasized to her liver. And so that's what made it stage 4, that it had metastasized and moved from one area to another area. And so, obviously they couldn't go in and get all of that cancer out. So, the only reason for them to have operated would have been, if her colon had clogged up, and then, like the cancer clogged it up. And so she made it almost 8 months from August of 2020. And so, she began to deteriorate. She was pretty much bedridden by December of that year. And then we had a little spell there where we were doing some treatments that were really helpful. But then we did some chemo treatments that were definitely not helpful. And so when she went downhill, so it was like she was really bad off in December. And then when she started to come back, then she deteriorated really fast. Like she got all the way down to 85 pounds. She's, 5'6", and she was 140 pounds when she was healthy. And by December of that year, she was 85 pounds. I'm carrying her back and forth to wheelchairs and, to doctor's appointments or whatever. And so she started to put weight back on. She got up to like 110 pounds by February. And so we had this little spell where things were going better. And then, then her belly started to swell, and we went into the doctor and went into the oncologist, and they said she had ascites, which was basically her liver was shutting down and she was swelling because of that. And so she only made it 2 weeks from that point. So we kind of came up, and then we just went real fast. So she made it about 2 weeks. And that was March the 5th of 2021. And, that began a series in my life where you just don't realize, especially with a spouse, when you lose a spouse and when you're in a good relationship and you lose that person that you're in a good relationship with, it's just not a clean break. It's not, it's not like, you lost something. It's not like you lost something and then, now you got to figure out how to deal with what you lost. It's that something was intertwined in literally every little aspect. Mm-hmm. And so you're trying to.
The last time we chatted, you actually described it like trying to pull apart a pad of steel wool. It's not something that's not like breaking bread. It's literally like trying to pull apart something that has a million connections in so many different areas. And I thought that was just one of the best analogies.
Yeah.
So I do want to point out that because Kaylee and I went back and listened to that episode again this week to just freshen up. And I was just like, man, there is so much wisdom, gold, there's faith, there's encouragement, there's heartache, and there's vulnerability on that. And so I do want to point anyone to episode 28. We're now in like the 90s, but episode 28, if you want to listen to Justin's story in full length, and like we dive into some really vulnerable stuff there, please go and do that.
100%.
But yeah, thank you for I know it's such a I don't want to rush past that question, but I really do want to hear about you guys and where things are at now. So would it be a fair point just to hear Kelly's story here?
I think so. I think just in the sense of, knowing that part of my story and then to hear hers, you'll begin to see how the Lord really began to put together, our story together. So, I'd love for them to be able to hear from you and what your journey looked like getting up to before us.
Yeah. So I mean, our stories are so similar. So, my late husband was diagnosed with, colon cancer in June of 2020. And, he had been sick for about 4 years, maybe 5 years previous to that. Just, we didn't know what it was. We were in landscaping, and it got to the point where he couldn't work anymore. So in 2015, we took him to the hospital because over the course of about 2 months, he dropped 70 pounds, and he was like going into full body, like cramping when he was out working. And, so we took him into the hospital, and he was diagnosed a type 1 diabetic, and they did a CT scan, and they found stuff in his pelvic area. And they were like, this is concerning. We don't know what it is, but we're going to do like a CT scan with contrast. And so they did that, and all the uptake went to his shoulder. And so they're like, well, this is what we're focused on. We're not worrying about the pelvic area anymore. We're going to worry about this here. So they found a mass in his shoulder. And so every 6 months, they wanted him to have it checked before they would do like a biopsy on it. They didn't want to do a biopsy yet. So 6 months, fast forward 6 months, they did another scan. There was no growth. They found out that there was nothing really happening there. But he just continued to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And it just got to the point where he was in so much pain, like right by his tailbone. Like he would just constantly rub his tailbone and just, like cry himself to sleep every night for like a year before diagnosis. And we're like, we have got to get to the bottom of this. We've seen doctor after doctor. And it finally got to the point where he was in so much pain. We took him, this was June of 2020, so height of COVID. And he went in, and they said, we want to do a colonoscopy on him. And so they admitted him, and they were going to do it the next morning, but they would not let me in the hospital with him because of COVID. And so I remember that day, the morning of, I drove there before work, and I could see his hospital room. And so he went to his window, and we went on the phone with each other, and we just prayed. We prayed for the best outcome. And I just told him that everything was going to be fine. And I went to work, and I said, call me as soon as you know something. And so I went to work, and
That's so cruel. Like, how did you, looking back on that, how did you get through accepting that you couldn't get into the room to see him? Like, how did you do that?
it makes me so angry now. Like I just, they stole something from me that just, you can't get back. So I was at work, and it was about, I don't know, an hour passed when his colonoscopy was scheduled. And I'm like, why hasn't he called me? So I call his phone, and he answers, and I'm like, hey, what's happening? And he's just quiet, and you can tell he's fighting back tears. And he said to me, it's cancer. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, it's cancer. And I was just blown away, because, you don't expect something like that from a 34-year-old man. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, and I was like, I'm headed over there right now. And so we hung up the phone with each other, and I called the hospital, and I said, hey, you guys, he just told me it was cancer. And they said, you can come right away. Since it's cancer, you can come. And I'm like, my husband was just dealt this diagnosis by himself. And so anyways, I was maybe 4 minutes from the hospital is where I worked. And so I went right over, and I called my mom on the way, because she had the girls. And I said, hey, I just found out it's cancer, but please don't say anything to the girls. I want to be the one to say something to them. And so my mom, she didn't tell them. And so I went over to the hospital, and my husband was just crushed, completely crushed. And so we waited, and the doctor came in, and the doctor was like, it's colon cancer. The doctor couldn't even look me in the eyes. And I get it. But at the same time, I'm like, you guys just dealt this news to my husband, who had to hear it by himself.
My blood just went cold as you shared that.
Oh yeah. It was just horrible, totally horrible. And, they didn't know if it was stage 4. They said they were thinking stage 3, but they were leaning more towards stage 4, because they had only done a colonoscopy at that point. And so they sent us, all this information. They said, you guys are going to have to go to an oncologist. And And so we did. We followed up with an oncologist that week, and they did more scans, and they found out that he had over 100 tumors throughout his body. I mean, it was all up and down his lymph nodes, his liver, his lungs, and it was colorectal cancer. And like Justin was just saying, I didn't really understand. And I'm telling you, even up to his last breath, I didn't think he was going to die. I just didn't understand it. And so they told us that with chemo, the longest they could give us was 6 months with him, and that they think that he's had it for probably the past 4 years. And so we just looked at each other, and, he's like, what do we do? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, we talked about this before. Like we've always said, if one of us ever got cancer, we were never going to do chemotherapy. Well, when you're faced with, hey, we can give you 6 months with chemo, or we're talking 2 months without. And so he wants to fight for his life. He wants to fight to be here for us. And so we opted for chemo.
Yeah, that's so understandable.
Yeah, you just don't know what to do. And now looking back, chemo drained every bit of life out of my husband, and I would never choose that for him or anybody ever again. But I didn't know. We were scared. We just had no idea. And in August of 2020, he became obstructed, and he wasn't able to go to the bathroom. His stomach was blowing up. So we brought him back to the hospital, and they said, we've got to rush him to Miami when we have to do emergency colostomy surgery. And so they wouldn't let me in to see him. And I waited in my hotel room, and I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And I got a phone call probably about 9 hours later saying that he made it out of the surgery okay, and that I would be able to see him in a couple of hours. And so I waited at the hospital, and I went in to see him, and he was in such a depression because of the colostomy bag. And he said he didn't feel like a man because, he had to be taken care of. And so that was August. And he was pretty full of life besides his pain. I'm telling you, he cried himself to sleep every night for 2 years before he passed away. And he would go to sleep in the bathtub to try and get any kind of relief. And this man was such a selfless man. Like, he would wait till I fell asleep in bed and rub my back, even though he was the one in pain, until I fell asleep. And then he would go in the bathtub and he would try and get some sleep of his own. And
he made it so Jonathan made it until March of 21.
May
of 21, excuse me. So he was diagnosed June.
2 months before
Sarah was diagnosed in August. Sarah passed away in March. He passed away in May. The journey of cancer was so similar, and we had similar experiences with operations, and we never had they couldn't operate on our tumor, but hospital stays and different scans and the like, and it's all COVID, so it's sometimes they let you in and sometimes they don't, and it's just such a convoluted time.
Yeah.
And so when we met on a grief group on Facebook. There was I'm
very curious in this as to how you met. If we backtrack a couple of steps, I'd love to know two things. Did both or either of you talk with Jonathan or Sarah about the potential of, if they died, that you would have their blessing to remarry? Did you talk about that first of all? And then second of all, where is your heart after you lose your spouse, and when does that idea or God speak to you where you go, I think I'm open to this door or this possibility? So
if you had the conversation, was it prior to them getting sick? Like, had you already said if anything ever happened to either of us, or was it while they were sick?
Yeah. I think that's funny because in both realms, we, like Kelly and I, we kind of made an X, like she was on one end of the spectrum and I was on the other end of the spectrum. And then somewhere we kind of like crossed and then crossed back. It's really funny the way that it worked. But for me, so I can just answer for myself and say that for me and Sarah, before she was ever sick, those kind of husband-wife conversations come up. Hey, if something ever happens to me, and, we joked it off. We were like, you better not, it was kind of like that kind of thing. Like, it wasn't like a serious, like we're sitting here making our will, it was like I'll come back and haunt you kind of thing. And I'm like, well, it doesn't work that way. Bad theology. And so, like we're like joking it off. And then when she got sick, we literally, and I think this part Kelly and I are very similar in, I did not believe, I had full faith that God was going to heal her and use her story of healing and deliverance from that. Yeah. That's what I believed was going to happen. And so, there was like a brief moment when they had diagnosed her with ascites. There was a brief moment that she looked at me and said, if I ever die, I want you. And I just stopped her. And I was like, no, Sarah, we're not doing that. I'm like my mom, my inner mom came out and I'm like, I rebuke that in the name of Jesus. We're not talking like that. Don't get that out of here. And so, the direct answer to the question for me is no, we did not have that conversation in such a way. And I would also just share with you that I would actually say that I don't know that that's a conversation. I'll say it this way. I don't know that's a conversation that I would actually want to have because, listen, my late wife is dancing with Jesus. Like she's good. And like I got left here and she got glory. Right. So like,
I totally feel
if she looked at me and said, no, then
that would have been an even bigger struggle for you.
Yeah. I'd be stuck with that. Like, she told me no, but I think from just from a personal stance, like my vows that I took when I got married was before me to my wife, before the Lord, till death do us part is what I promised. And I fulfilled that promise. Like I never went back on that promise.
And it's so interesting. Like that's why I'm so reminded every conversation of how unique our relationships and then grief are. Because it's so different for Kaylee, whose mum passed through a 7-year battle of cancer, but her and your dad had that conversation if she was to pass, right?
Yeah, well, like I like listening to both your stories prior to this conversation. I wept for you, like the other day, Kelly, and Justin, hearing yours as well. Like I so resonate with you guys and believing for healing right until the end. Mum's journey was a lot longer than you guys, so I didn't know my dad had already grieved mum before she passed. He actually wasn't in the country when she passed. And we were believing right up until the day, even after she had passed, we were believing God could use her story and bring her back,
Literally.
Like she was the woman that everyone knew that in the mall. Yeah.
In the morgue.
In the morgue. Oh, yeah.
When her dad came back from overseas, because she'd passed a couple of days earlier.
Brought her out of the cool room. And we brought her into intercessor, and all us 4 kids and dad, we were all around there like praying for her
to come back to life.
Like we were like, why not use her? Why not use her story? And similarly, we had the same thing with, her story being a year went by when we were asking the doctors what's wrong with her, why she got this back pain, and breast cancer had spread up down her spine. It's like we lost her in that year, and we're like, that is not fair. Like, why is this happening? In this day and age with so much technology, but
on the topic of marriage or remarriage,
mum and dad had that conversation. They're a bit further along than you guys are, but they had that conversation. Like if anything was to happen to us, we would want each other to remarry and for the kids and for you to have a companion. So,
and I think if the person suffering with the disease, if they're giving their blessing, I think that's a fair conversation. I think an open-ended, especially if it's the opposite, if it's like, I don't want you to get married. And I can tell you, my late wife probably would have told me no. She'd have been like, no, no. Like,
well, I mean, that is kind of, my story. I will tell you, pre-cancer, pre-sickness, healthy human being, about 3-4 years into our marriage, he looked at me and he said, "I'm not going to make it to 40." And I looked at him and I'm like, "Why would you say that to me?" And he said, "I just know. I know that I'm going to be young when I pass." And I said, "Please don't talk like that. If that ever were to happen, let me deal with it at that point in time. But don't talk like that. That stuff doesn't happen." Fast forward, and this was probably 2 months before he passed, and he just looked at me and he said, "I know you're gonna need somebody." And I said, no, stop right there. I said, "We are not having this conversation." And he said, "But I just want to say one thing." He said, I want you to wait until our girls are older, because I don't want them to call someone else dad." And so where I say that's different, because my girls do call him dad, but my husband was speaking from an earthly perspective. You know, he's in glory. He's in glory. And I think he would be so happy to know that his girls have a really great dad taking care of them here. They still know about him. We talk about him all the time. My youngest was 3 when he passed away. You know, she doesn't know much. You know, she's 7 years old now, and she's known Justin for 3 years. And from the moment she met him, she had an attachment to him. And I'm telling you, there was this bond instantly. And, you know, she's just, now I'm sure she only looks at him like he's dad, you know? And so that's
Moments. Yeah, those moments are so interesting. Maybe you've thought about this. Like you just said, she's 7 now and she only had dad for 3 years, but now Justin for 4 years. It's flipped to that
yeah,
she's known you longer than dad, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
Yeah.
we have all of those different moments where time becomes longer without than with that person. And it just shakes up how you think about everything.
it does.
Yes, and it brings a reality to how brief things really are. You know, even to the tune of, like, you know, I think about, like, with my late wife, I was with her for almost 18 years. We almost made it to, if she had made it a few more months, we would have had our 18th wedding anniversary. And so I was 18 years, you know, not married as a, you know, kid growing up, 18 years old, I got married, and then almost made it to 18 years with her. And then, but now that she's passed, and I look and I go, it's already been 4 years since she's been gone. And so that first 18 years now looks so short, you know,
Right.
in the whole scheme of things. And so it really brings a perspective to the, you know, the brevity of life. And so coming out of that passing, you'd ask the question, like, when did you start to know? So for me, I will tell you that, like, interestingly, very immediately, you know, I started having my social media presence begin to kind of pop off. And so all of a sudden, like, you know, I'm seeing, and it started when Sarah was diagnosed, but it was like really beginning to see, like, you know, at one point it was like 4,000 or 5,000 people a week are following me on Instagram. And, you know, I'm just getting hundreds of messages every single day. And so I remember my mom said to me, it was like a week after my late wife had passed, and my mom's like, "Justin, you realize you're probably the most eligible bachelor in Oldham County," which is where we live, Oldham County. And I was like, "Mom, I don't want to hear that right now. Like, thanks, but no thanks."
Like, too soon.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. Like, you know, and she's like, "I'm just telling you." And I'm like, "Thanks, but no thanks." And so, you know, probably for me, I would say, you know, like, there's the extreme grief. Like, I'm talking like you're buried, anxiety attacks. You feel like you can't breathe. You feel like you can't move. You know, you're literally, you have to intentionally make yourself do anything. You know, even take a bite of food or go take a shower, or, you know, just anything. Like, I vividly remember laying in this very room and staring at the ceiling and thinking to myself, never suicidal, never that, but just thinking, like, I literally do not want to wake up. Like, I don't want to wake up tomorrow. I wish I wasn't here. And so once I got through that, I would say for me, that was I don't think anybody has a timeline that you could say this is what it should be. I'm just saying mine, you know, probably about a month after that, I began to have the thought of, you know, like, it made me feel better to think, like, I fulfilled my vow. I told her till death do us part. I stuck it out through death do us part. when she was, I mean, I remember, I think I might have said this in another podcast. I can't remember if I told you the story or not, but I remember, coming in one day and she's pulling on her loose skin. She was skinny, but she had all this loose skin from where she had lost all her weight, and she was weeping. And I said, what's wrong? What's going on? And I sat on the side of the bed, and she said, how can you love me? Look at me. And she was just so distraught because of how she looked, because of, all this loose skin from where she's, lost all this weight. And I just remember hugging her, and I told her, I was like, things like this make me love you more. Like I loved her till the end, and still love her. Like I still have a love for her. And so, it made me feel good to think like I promised her, I lived out that promise. I never went back on it. Even when we're going through, we said in sickness and in health, and we have lived through the in sickness part and stayed true even in that. And so probably like a month in, I began to have that thought, and that really helped me to think like, I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life. Like there's a weird dichotomy that happened in my mind that said, if you find someone, when you find someone, one of the two of you probably has to experience this again in life. That you have to go through this very thing that I'm suffering right now. And so, that was a big hurdle for me, but it wasn't a big enough hurdle that I didn't have the desire to say, okay, I don't want to be alone. And so that was on my mind probably 4 weeks or 6 weeks into being widowed, being a widower. And then Kelly came into it, and you were.
Yeah. So
weighed the reward there.
Yeah. And so we met each other through Facebook end of May 2021. So he was 2 months into it, almost 3 months into it, and I was 3 weeks into it. And so we were obviously at two kind of different, spots. Like I was freshly grieving, and I mean, not that he wasn't, he's 3 months, but I'm just saying, like, he just spoke about that first 6-week period where you're just like, I mean, I literally did not want to wake up, but I had to just remember I have 3 daughters that they need me. I have to wake up. But I remember just praying to God, like, why do I have to wake up today? And that was like the worst thing, was to wake up in the morning. Falling asleep was hard enough, but then waking up in the morning and realizing it's like Groundhog's Day. You're waking up to the same reality every single day. And I remember, so what I said to my husband, my late husband, I said, you don't have to worry about me getting remarried. You married a strong woman, and I'm going to be married to you for the rest of my life. And so I had this mentality that I am never, and then there's guilt associated with any thought of moving forward with anybody else, And so I meet him. And within
it's hard, Kelly. It's hard when you meet the most eligible bachelor of Kentucky.
This is true.
That's only according to the weighted view of my mother.
No, but it's true. It's true.
I trust that source.
Yeah, I do too.
I think she might have a skewed opinion.
No, she was right. She was definitely right. But within a couple days of meeting him, I went from not wanting to wake up to having a joy waking up, knowing I have a friend who has been through exactly what I've been through. And I'm telling you, I had a few close friends. It was nothing. They couldn't touch the grief. They couldn't touch the fact that I did not have my best friend. The right side of my body was no longer here. They couldn't provide that. But there was something in our friendship that instantly I looked forward to waking up again. And, I went through some stuff when I moved here with some people that kind of gave me a rough go round. And I looked at them and I said, you guys have no idea what it's like to not want to wake up, to then meeting somebody and wanting to wake up again. You don't know what that's like, so you have no room to speak about anything that I'm feeling right now. And so
I've got shivers up and down my body when you just said that nothing could touch what had happened meeting Justin. Like no relationship or friendship or family could touch what had transpired. And like, you only know if you know that something's changed in your heart. Like no one can see that from the outside, or words can't describe that. And that's what I'm picking up here. That like no matter that promise that you gave to your late husband, no matter how strong and deep that was and still is, when something shifts your heart, especially when God's on it,
Yes.
nothing comes close to that. And that's
That's
what I'm
right.
hearing you say right now.
That's right.
And I'll just share
Kelly,
with you
the fact that you were able to communicate to these people,
these naysayers.
yeah, I think you were able to say what so many of our listeners have wanted to say to
Yes.
people in their lives.
Yes.
So like, well done.
Thank you.
So we made this kind of crisscross because in the beginning, Kelly was saying, I
said, just so you know,
yeah,
I am not looking. I'm married to my late husband for the rest of my life. I do not want to have any kind of relationship like that. And I remember him saying to me, I want to be the person, not him. Like I want you to know that you honored your commitment, and I want you to know that you can find love again. You don't have to feel, like you can't move forward.
But I definitely was not saying that from a standpoint of like trying to
pick
date
up me.
Right. I was just saying that like we were literally just counseling with each other, sharing with each other, grieving with each other via phone. It started out, it was like Facebook Messenger, she's like, I see that you work out. Like, do you ever, could you share some of those with me? Or, it was like, I don't know, awkwardly, if I think back on it, it's probably cringy. I'm like, sending you workouts or something.
Not at all. It was like a friendship that just blossomed immediately.
Yeah. And so, we began like just as these friends kept sharing with each other. And then, her mindset flipped. Definitely, I can share the sentiment that, there was something to look forward to pick up my phone and see a text message from Kelly.
Yeah.
But I definitely wasn't.
I think most people, I hope, can relate to that thought, because I think back to like high school sweethearts and like when I first got a mobile phone and like I would get a text from a girl that I was interested in, like that feeling as a young boy, as a kid. It's no different when you're an adult, and it sounds like, not that I've had the experience, it sounds like it's the same even after losing a spouse.
Yeah.
To some degree. I mean, there's a weird dynamic that's happening where there's guilt that when you begin to feel attraction.
Yes.
There's guilt. So. It felt, for me, it felt very much like cheating. And I had to like really intentionally say like, I'm not cheating. So we actually were friends for a good while. We met in 21. We met in person in 2022. And then Kelly moved up here. I'm trying to give you the kind of abbreviated version. Kelly moved up here and we were still not dating. She moved from Florida to Kentucky and we were friends. She was ready for a move. Florida became very expensive, height of COVID again, forced everybody. Florida was kind of a free state. They weren't making people do the stuff that everybody else was. So people were flooding to Florida to move down there. So prices of everything had gone up. So Kelly couldn't afford to stay there. So she had always wanted to move to Tennessee. She came up to visit Tennessee and we met in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and we had a tour of a cave. We went to Mammoth Cave and we still were not dating. And I remember her calling me and she said, what would you think about me moving to Kentucky instead of Tennessee? And I'm like, you're a grown woman, do what you want, I'm just like, so, I'm just so like nonchalant about it, but I did help her. I was able to help her find a place. I was like, hey, if you're going to look into Kentucky, like let's find a place that I could say like, that's a good spot or that's not a good spot. You wouldn't want to take your girls and go live there. And so she moved here and we're still friends. We become best friends. I would say, by this point, we're like literally becoming like best friends, texting each other, calling each other, helping each other all the time. We're always around with each other. And that kind of relationship is spurring on. But we didn't actually begin to date until 2023. So
this is partly, this is like what I'm curious about. Cause like when we first, chopped the fat on our podcast, you guys were dating, but I didn't know. Is that correct? It wasn't public? Because that was April last year, 2024, right?
Yeah. So
March 30th of 2023 is when we started dating.
All right. So it was under wraps.
Yeah, it was totally under wraps. And not only was it under wraps, like, I mean, like if you say like, I mean, it was on like Facebook, like in a relationship with, it certainly wasn't a secret, that we were dating. We were friends. It was funny, part of the things that, as the naysayers that Kelly talked about, some of that came from the fact that we were not dating for so long. And, people were saying to me like, oh, you can't be friends for that long. And what are you waiting for? And so on and so forth. But there was just a lot of emotion and baggage to deal with. And again, I would just give the encouragement to anybody to say, like, your timeline is your timeline.
Because we had two different timelines. So I knew, like, I fell in love with him within 6 months of knowing him. I fell just in love with him. And I knew, like, in my heart where we were going to go and where we were going to end up. But, he had a different grieving timeline. He felt a lot of guilt. I felt a lot of guilt right at first when I started feeling those feelings. But then right thereafter, I was like, I'm okay. I'm okay to do this. And there's nothing wrong with me doing this. And it's
so interesting how it's flipped for both of you.
Yeah.
Like,
that's the X.
It's like these train tracks that are heading in the same direction, but then they swap sides of the track. It's so interesting how guilt is flipped, how the love and the timeline changed.
Yes.
This is fascinating.
And so,
it's not easy. It's not easy for people remarrying after loss when you don't have a large public audience. And then you guys are also, or Kelly, you got pulled into the spotlight of a pastor of a church with a large, hundreds of thousand people on the line as well. So I know you guys copped a lot of questions and statements and all sorts of.
Y'all, that's a whole podcast in itself.
It really is.
Yeah.
There was a lot.
How I've been online in the public eye for like 2 decades, right? From as soon as MySpace started. And I've had multiple times where I've had to really retreat because of how much anxiety it's brought me because of what people's opinions are. How did you guys deal with that together while you're trying to build a new relationship, form new love, take care of 9 kids?
Yeah.
It's been a rough.
Well, I think dating was rough. Once we got through, I feel like we had some weeds to get through in dating. Like that was really tough.
Not between us. The rough wasn't between us. Mm-hmm. It was the naysayers. It was
the gossip. Even to the point of backbiting. People would like ask us things, and then they would even probe us with things. Like one example, somebody said to Kelly, they came up and met her at church. And they said, "Oh, we know you're Justin's friend, and you've been hanging out with him, and I really even haven't got to know you yet." And then Kelly began to share her story, and this person said, "Oh, you ought to write a book." And then Kelly
and I said, "I've thought about writing a book, but."
And so that same person then went and told a whole bunch of people that, "Oh, well, here's this woman who's fallen in love with Justin, and she said that they're going to write a book together." And so this like whole little like gossip thing goes on. Like all of a sudden, all these people are like, "Are you saying you're writing a book with Kelly?" I'm like, "Hold up. Like she's my friend, like I don't think I'm writing a book with her. It's news to me." And so, I remember one of those, it was funny. I'll go to church and, here's some of the, leadership at church, and they're pulling me to the side and, in a scathing way. And they said, "Well, we heard that you've been sneaking out of your house to go see this woman." And I went, "Sneaking out of my house? I'm a grown man. I bought my home. I bought my car. Like I don't sneak out of my house. I just left.
I locked the door on the way out."
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was like, and they were like, "Well, we heard that it's at all hours of the night." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "It was like 9:30 one night when I headed out. Do I have a curfew? Is it 11? At least when I was 16, my curfew was 11. Like I didn't know I couldn't leave at 9:30. And so, but it was just, as you said, like being in the public eye is one thing. And then even more so to be a pastor. Pastors are under a lot of scrutiny. My life is under a microscope. And I remember telling Kelly when we began to date, I warned her, I said, "Kelly, like my life is under a microscope. And I don't date with, I'm not going to date unless I have the intention to say, could this be marriage?" And so, with that understanding, do you understand that your life could be under the microscope as well? And, that you need to know that like, that's not a possibility. That is a reality. If everyone's looking at everything that I do, they're going to look at everything that you do.
Yeah.
And so, but once the good thing is this, I think that once we got through the weeds, like once we got through all the naysayers and the gossipers and the backbiting and all those sorts of things, that took a little time to kind of weed it all out. And literally, like, people kind of left our life, like left relationships with us, left the church. There was kind of some hard parts of that. But the flip side is that the people who stuck it out with us, I mean, when we got engaged, man, like, the support and the love.
It was amazing. It really was.
I imagine the new relationships that's welcomed in as well have been fruitful. Like,
yes. And now there's this kind of like army of people that are like Team Justin and Kelly. I feel like at this point, like, if somebody tried to like say something now, there'd be like people standing between us, like, they'd be sword and spear and shield,
I almost feel like you guys are the Kentucky like Bachelor, the Christian Bachelor show,
With our wedding, we invited the entire church. We had just an open wedding, potluck.
Yeah.
So we had 400 people at our wedding, and I'm telling you, it was the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. You just, because we decided that most of the congregation walked through his grief with him. They didn't know mine so much, but they did know his. And then they knew of mine, after a little while. And so we just thought, if you've walked through the hard times, walk through these beautiful times with us. The story of restoration, we want you guys to be witnesses too. And so the wedding was just amazing. It was beautiful and just...
I'm curious on the wedding. I'm curious as to, did you allow your celebrant to say, does anybody have anything to say?
No.
Speak now, forever. Yeah.
No. Very specifically, no. Like we had this moment where it was kind of like a laughing moment with the Pastor Kirk. He's at Salt Light with us, and I told him, I was like, we do not ask that question. That's not.
We've had too many opinions already. We are not asking anyone else's opinion.
Right.
But I think that even if we had asked that question, it would have been a unanimous. You marry each other, you guys.
I kind of think if somebody had spoke up, the whole congregation would have picked him up and crowd surfed him out the door. Pushed him away.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'm thinking about here is, like, we're talking about these relationships that leave when you walk through loss, and then there's relationships that come into your life and form, and then there's some that stay and they remain. And then there's these relationships that don't know anything else but Justin and Kelly. Like, they didn't know Sarah and Jonathan. And so to them, this is a married couple that's all they know. And they've got 9 kids and they don't know anything different. And that's such an interesting, story in and of itself, those relationships.
Right.
Man, I'm loving this conversation. I thank you guys for being I love the way you handle the tough parts of life. And you definitely don't forget the joy that comes in around all of those areas. And I love that on your podcast. And whenever I see you guys online together, Kelly, you're just, for the most part, always laughing, which I just love. And it's so contagious.
Yeah.
And so what I'd love to sort of talk about now is, like, what would you feel to say to somebody? Because here's the thing, like, you might not know this, Kelly, about my story. Like, Dad died tragically, plane crash. Mum and Dad just shy of their 30th anniversary. And my mum is still so married to my dad. His wedding ring lives on her thumb. And she have this conversation, like, somewhat regularly. And we're not ready for her to remarry, but it's her choice. But she's very much married to him for the rest of her days. What would you guys say to a widow or widower in terms of how they process their own heart as to, is it right for them, or should they open that door, or should they consider those thoughts? Should they take it to the Lord? What would you guys say?
Well, I would say I could give for myself. I think that I'd lived in the place that you described your mom. I think I lived there a little longer than Kelly did. I knew in my mind you can have a knowledge of something, but then there's an experience level that's different. And so the head knowledge says, biblically, I can show you some scriptures that say, like, let the widows remarry. And like, I could totally talk
That's
through
right.
that in a logical, theological, rational way. But my heart was very married to and connected to Sarah. And so I think for me, knowing that it was okay was a first step. And then for me, the second one was, the thought of like, do I want to be here, like in this kind of realm of grief and loneliness? Do I want to be here forever? And the answer is no. So, I used to kind of play this game with myself. I call it a game, but it's not a fun game. But it was like, do the thing that you don't want to do. And so in the earliest days, that's like, make yourself take a shower. Get up and go take a shower. No, you're right. There's no one to take a shower for. Nobody's smelling you in bed tonight, right? Like, it's not like I'm doing it for somebody, but you're going to do it,
With exercise, take care of your body, but there's no one to see that reward or that result.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I played that same game. Maybe game's not the right word, but I would do that same thing even when it came to Kelly and I. Like, I would go on a date with Kelly and I would get in my car and I would drive from her house to my house and I would weep on the way home because I hurt so bad. Now, in the moment, like, I'm telling you, we could go out and go do something and I could be laughing with her, having a good time, drive her to her house, tell her good night, get in my car, and 4 seconds later, maybe 10 seconds, I don't know, whatever, I'm getting to the end of the road and like choking up, tears coming out, and I'm losing it. And so then the next time we're thinking about going on a date, I'm having those thoughts of like, the last time this is what it looked like. And so I had to like.
And would you share that with Kelly? Would you weep, get home, and then would you text her and just say, "Hey, I just broke down"?
Well, I mean, sometimes like, we're like teenagers and she's, we're calling, we go on a date and then we get home, we call each other and, and
we videoed each other every night. Even when we lived in Kentucky, 2 miles down the road, we would go on a date and then he'd get home and we'd video each other and then we'd watch a movie together on video. And
so there were times that I would, text her and I'd be like, hey, like I need some time. Like I'm having a hard time tonight, and grief is that funny little thing that like you can be perfectly fine. And then something can stir up an emotion, a smell, a pass something, drive a certain car, a problem can happen that used to happen when they were there. I don't know, like all kinds of things can kind of trigger that. And so, that'd be really difficult. But I would force myself in the thought of like, I don't want to live here forever. And if I don't go through this, I never get to the other side of it. Like, I don't want to live alone. I remember coming to bed at night. That was a really hard one for me. I never slept apart from my late wife, not once in 18 years, not even when we had babies and she was in the hospital. I'd laid in the hospital bed right beside her. And, like we were in the same bed for 18 years together. And so coming to the bedroom at night was a dreaded thing. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking to myself, do I want to feel this dread for the rest of my life? No. So I fought that through. And then that led even into the engagement. So we dated for well over a year, about a year and
a year and a half.
So right at about a year and a half. And it was probably like 2 months before I proposed that I woke up one day with this thought of like how lonely it felt to wake up again. I'm like getting to the point in my head, I'm counting the days. I'm like, it's been over 1,000 days that I've slept alone. It's been 1,000 days since I've shared my bed with someone. And I had this thought that ran through my head that said, you're doing that. Like you're doing that to yourself. Like I've got this beautiful woman that's dating me that she would totally be willing to get married to me. And I'm choosing each day not to get engaged. I'm willfully choosing not to because of the pain part. I'm still choosing not to. And so that kind of reality check of like, the cancer, I didn't have any choice in. The passing, I didn't have any choice in. But today, I do have a choice. And so that sounds simple, but I'm telling you, it was a revelation in the moment.
Yeah, what I'm
Right.
hearing is reminding me of this thought or this idea that like exercise is hard, but being overweight is hard.
Yeah.
Marriage is hard, but divorce is hard. And when it comes to grief, isolation is hard,
Yes.
connection is also hard, and it's about
Yes.
choosing the level of hard. Like either option are going to be difficult. Like that's what I'm hearing echoed here. And when it comes to our loss, nothing like loss brings about isolation that I've ever walked through. Like depression, anxiety, friendship breakdown, financial struggles, nothing like loss has brought about isolation in the same way. And
Yeah.
so would I rather, what I'm hearing is like, would I rather stay isolated alone for the rest of my days, or and it be hard, or would I rather lean in to a relationship? But that's going to be hard. There's going to be memories, there's going to be milestones, there's going to be all sorts of challenges that come up there. Which one would I rather?
Yeah.
Would I rather, like be in pain? Grief is going to still go on no matter,
Right.
if you're alone or not. But you could be doing that with someone. You could be doing
Yeah.
that together with someone who fully understands you.
And
Yeah.
it sounds like we're making a real case here for remarriage after loss, but we're
Yeah.
not. We're just discussing your
Yeah.
your
That's right.
unique situations.
Yeah.
That's right. Because you could be
And
in a scenario of grief that, your first of all, everyone's scenario is different, right? Everyone's story is different, but someone could be in a position where, they 6 months after their loss, they could be where I coming to that realization that I was coming to, or maybe for other people it'd be 6 years, not 6 months. I mean, you're in your own story. You're in your. The one encouragement I would give anyone would be to say, don't let someone else try to tell you a timeline. Don't let a book or a pastor or a counselor try to tell you, oh, well, you should be at this stage of grief. The stages of grief are not in order. They come and they go. They're back and forth. And so,
Yeah.
it's okay to be where you are in the moment that you're there, whether that's 6 months or 6 years. For me, it took 3 years to get to that point to say, like, I don't want to be alone enough that I'm willing to go through the hard parts of, getting remarried. Not that I didn't want to be married, just that, like, I didn't want the pain associated with it. It felt like one more separation, like another separation that says, like, okay, I know that it's permanent. I know this is never changing. Not on this side of the grave, like this is never changing, but it felt like one more, means of pulling me away from my old life that I loved. I loved my wife, and I loved the life that we had together. And so it was like one more thing to pull us apart. But also, like, I don't want to continue in this. I don't want to continue being alone, and I do have a choice. And so, yeah, that's there you go. I don't know if that's helpful to somebody, but maybe it is.
Yeah. No, it is. And there's also another consideration is that, and you guys sort of alluded to it earlier, is like remarrying again. At some point in life, one of you are going to have to deal with the loss of the other. And I think about a good friend and faith mentor of ours, Dave Schaefer. We had him on the podcast, sitting face to face with him here, telling me how he lost his first wife to cancer, remarried. I got to meet his second wife, and then she passed to cancer as well.
Wow.
And in the middle, he lost his daughter.
And his daughter too. But point blank, I asked Dave, I said, how do you feel about love in the future? And he just said, look, I don't know. I don't know if I can deal with another broken heart if it's not me first. And that is such a reality too. And so, you guys are well aware of that, and so thoughtful in terms of considering it, but also you're weighing up, well, until that day comes, do I want to spend that alone? And so it's so different. He remarried and lost a second wife. My mum hasn't, and it's been 13 years, and she's had to learn and deal with a lot of loneliness and rediscovering what life looks like in a huge empty house with two sons that have left and married and all of those things. But the hope in all of that is that, like, you guys are a testament to what can be when you open your heart, and that is right. And then also, I'd say for my mom, I bring her up a lot on the podcast because she has now got a new sense of purpose, and she does have hope, and she wakes up with joy, and she plans for things. And she's just left yesterday for a 6-week camping trip with her dog and a friend. And so, two polar opposite stories, but both with hope in sight. And so I love that you guys are sharing from that perspective.
Yeah. Guys, I would love to know, how have you pulled the kids into, maybe did you pull them into the decision? Was it solely like, no, this is our love, our relationship, and you're along for the ride, or were they brought into the conversation? How have you gone about that?
So my girls have always, I mean, whether they're just like me, they're these like little, hopeful romantics.
Everything's a heart.
Everything is a heart. Everything is dreamy. They have always been gunning. Like I do remember she's now 11, but she was like 8 at the time. And she looked at me, we were still in Florida, and she knew she knew I had a friend, but that's all she knew. She didn't know that I loved him. She didn't know any of that. And she looked at me one night and she said, "Hey Mom, I think God made Justin for you." And I was just like,
gosh.
oh my gosh.
Aw.
But I know. And then we move here, and they all just fell in love with him. And so they were gunning for it, ready for it, all of that. And so I didn't ever have to have like so is it okay? Are you guys good with, I knew where they stood. And he was always very vocal with his kids, step by step by step, making sure he protected their feelings, their hearts, wanted to know how they felt. Were they,
were they okay? I'd literally started out before I met Kelly in person. I asked my kids, I went to them and I said, "Hey, I've met this woman, and I know this is new." We were still within that first year, a lot of first, and so it was just after the holidays. I knew I wanted to meet Kelly. It's around Christmas time that year, and I knew I wanted to see her, but I took some advice from another pastor, and he said, "Wait till after the holidays and tell your kids after the holidays that you've met this person and you want to meet her." And so I did. I waited till after the holidays, and I approached my kids and I said, "Hey, there's this woman, Kelly, and we've been talking, and she's going to come up here to Kentucky, and we're going to meet in Bowling Green. I would like to do that, but I want to honor your all's feelings. Like, how would you all feel about that?" And, there was, I'm just going to leave it at this and say there was mixed feelings about that.
Sure.
But ultimately the kids wanted to, they wanted to see Dad happy. And so they, we worked through that. And then, there were rocky patches. We were legitimately just friends. We were not dating. We were friends. I say just friends. I mean, we were really good friends, but, then we, get a year later, go ahead.
Can I ask a question there in regards to knowing your story, as to have, adopting 2 kids when you were quite young and then having 4? And I know 6 of them, they are your kids, but just, I don't want to press too hard, but like, in terms of those mixed feelings, did it differ among your 2 that you adopted into your family? Like, did that, and I know that might,
I mean, full transparency, and if they watch this, I hope to protect their feelings. But the interesting thing is that my older children and the ones that were adopted took it harder than my biological children and the younger. It feels like the younger children were definitely more open and more receptive in the beginning. And my older children, it was hard. It was harder for them. It was one thing I've equated that to is that the older that our children are, when someone passes, the more life they remember of having this person. So, the ratio, like me, her youngest, now our youngest, she's 7, more than half of her life is without her dad. But for the one who was 18, 17 when Mom passed, and it's going to take a lot longer for that ratio of like, that's half my life with Mom and half my life without Mom. So it was definitely a hard thing for the older ones and the ones who were adopted. It was definitely hard for them, and I think part of that maybe also stems from the fact of knowing that Dad is an open heart to other children. Like, he's adopted before. Like, I have a heart for adoption. I love adoption. I mean, that's a whole other part of my life, is that I love adoption. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I always am encouraging people to do that, because there's such a great need there. So, again, then to our story.
I can really resonate with your older kids. Like, if Mum, for me, was to say, hey, I went on this camping trip and there's a guy that I met. As much as I'd like to think that my heart would be soft and gentle and open and gracious and loving, I would have to work through a bunch of stuff there, and I'm totally not expecting that to come back. So with that expectation, like I can maybe imagine that your kids probably had an expectation, or some of them had an expectation. They're like, no, dad is very much married to mom, and he's mentioned that. And so our expectations get shattered when we hear something that is different to that. And so I can fully resonate with them, and I can imagine how much I'd have to work through as well. So I empathize big time.
Whereas I resonated with your daughter, Kelly, because my brother and I, we suggested Geraldine to dad when we knew he started dating.
Which blows my mind every time I hear it. And I never knew Kaylee's mum. I've only ever known her stepmom, who they're now remarried. And I love her, and I've had to learn to love your mum that I've never met. But it blows my mind that you could suggest to your dad to remarry, and he's the actual person. But I think that's where God and the Holy Spirit truly interconnect. And Kelly, you said it. I don't want to cut you off, but Kelly, you were just saying about your eldest, how she said, I actually think God brought you Justin. And I just believe so much that there's no junior Holy Spirit. And I fully believe that God was speaking through her to you in confirmation of that in such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, like, I was 24, almost 25 when mum passed, and I didn't know dad had already done his grieving, because of her long journey. And so when he had started dating, so now they've been married, I think 10 or 12 years. 10 years, 10 or 11 years. And so that's almost half my life with mom that they've been married already now. So like you said, the time is now like
the ratio is a weird thing
switching.
to consider.
But we knew that dad needed a companion. I think we did know that they had that conversation. And so at the time, it did happen a little quicker than probably we were comfortable with, but when it became about Geraldine and God had opened dad's eyes towards her after we'd suggested, she was already going to our church. She knew mom, that whole journey.
And
she was so respectful
complete
of mom. And
complete side note, she'd just written and published a book on singleness because she'd never been married before.
She was 45, never been married, and just published this book, and then dad comes on the scene.
He messed it all up. Which you guys can relate to, obviously, by your journey here.
Yeah.
Wow. There's a lot here when it comes to like when we speak with the people in our community about taking care of kids, and they'll resonate, Kelly, so much with that idea of I don't want to wake up. And I love, Kelly, that you actually said that you were praying to God saying, why do I have to wake up? And the fact that you weren't running away from God, you're actually taking it to him, your challenges to him, just speaks so much volumes to your faith, even when it was in the fire and the hardest. I'd like to know the best and worst, apologies for the poor, like simple English, best and worst part about marrying another widow.
Or maybe not worst, but hardest.
Yeah. I think
however you want to answer that. Yeah.
Hardest might be a better phrase.
I think for me, I could say that the best part is to have someone with a shared experience. I'll tell you a quick story to help illustrate this. We went for a walk. Were we engaged when we went for this walk?
I don't know.
I can't remember what I'm talking about, right? The old lady that we ran into.
I think we were married.
Okay, I think we were. Yeah. So we went for a walk around our little community here, and we ran into this old lady. She kind of stopped and was being chatty with us, and there was something that local people were voting on, and about whether or not we can have Airbnbs around here, or do they not want that in the community? It's stupid, but that's not the point. Like, she's chatting about that, and she says, well, where are you all from? And so we were telling them that she was from Florida and I'm from right here, and if we're right about the timeline, we had just gotten married.
You weren't married.
I didn't think
remember I said I live 2 miles
that's right.
down the road.
Yeah. So we told her that, And then we told her that we were both widowed, that I was a widower and Kelly was a widow. And she said, "Oh my, I dated a widower once. And she said, that woman, she called his late wife. She said his ex-wife. She was like, his ex-wife lived in that house. And she was like, I had to break up with him for it. She was like, look, your blood's boiling right now. And she said, but she could not grasp, like, the way she worded it. She was like,
she was so cruel.
She was like,
he was like, Kelly.
Well, I did shut the conversation. I was like, well, and we're going to go. So we just kind of like moved on. But she, she was like, here's this woman. She's an older lady. She's saying she dated this man who was a widower, and his ex-wife lived in that house. And what she meant was like, she said this, she was like, there was dishes that he didn't want to get rid of because they were hers. And there was a clock, an ugly clock on the wall that, he was so attached to. And I'm like, well, I mean, here's what I mean by that. Like, she doesn't get it. Like, she doesn't understand that. We get it. Right outside of this room, we have a hallway. We put up a sign at the top and it says Memory Lane. And on one half of the wall are pictures of Kelly and Jonathan. And on the other half of the wall are pictures of me and Kelly me and Sarah and our kids. And then at the end of the hallway are blended of both of us, Kelly and I together and everybody together. And so,
That's amazing.
we don't have a jealousy of, I don't hear her talk about Jonathan. She doesn't hear me talk about Sarah, and we feel jealousy because we understand. So I think the best part, you said, what's best, what's worse? I think for me, best part would be having somebody that truly understands where my heart is. I have more than one child, and I don't love one child more than another. I love all of those children equally. And so
that's beautiful.
It doesn't for me feel like I'm in no way a polygamist, but I'm saying that, like, I feel like I have two wives. I have my late wife,
totally.
And she's gone. She's waiting for us in heaven. One day we're all going to meet, and I'm going to introduce her to Kelly. And then I have this current wife. I have Kelly, and it's love at the same time. Like, I love Sarah and I love Kelly. And so that's happening simultaneously, and Kelly can understand that. I'll let you give a best before I give a hardest.
Okay.
Yeah,
unless you want to give a hardest.
And I'm thanking you guys for saying hardest over and over, because I really want to correct my language. Hardest is probably the best way to go about it. And we're coming from the point of view that both of us have lost a parent, very different to a spouse, but there are the best parts about understanding that, which we resonate. And then there are hard parts about that at the same time. So Kelly, please, I'd love to hear your best or your hardest.
I think the best part, honestly, for me, is just seeing the goodness of God. Like, I went from a broken hearted, never thought that I would ever feel hopeful or feel like living ever again, to being completely madly in love with this man, still loving my late husband, and just the restoration. I think it's such a beautiful thing that the Lord does, that he can restore something like this back to life. You know what I mean? Like, it's the most beautiful thing to me. I think that's the best part of this.
Yeah.
I love that. I asked
I get hardest.
Okay, you got hardest.
I'll do it.
Right,
Is there a hardest? Let us know.
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm afraid
come
to know
on.
your hardest.
We're not talking about marriage. We're talking about, like, being married to a widow.
Yeah.
Like, and mine comes from my own perspective of myself. Yeah.
It's not personal.
Yeah, I think probably the hardest part is so I built this life with Jonathan, like we were so alike, and everything was so in common that we became one. And not that we're not one, but I have to learn a completely different person, and so here we are building this life that, he's got different ways, I've got different ways, and, blending the two families, I think it's not hard. So I wouldn't say it's the hardest part of it. It's just different. It's just different.
I can't imagine it's not easy though, right? It's not hard, but it's not easy.
I don't know.
Okay.
I think it takes intentionality.
Yeah.
I think that, it's one of those things in life that it can't just happen because it doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
It happens because you make it happen.
Yeah.
You have to, you kind of have to, I don't know, you kind of have to push a little.
Yeah.
There's a little resistance in areas, and you have to push through the resistance.
Yeah.
So I think that's the way I would word what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I would say that
I love that.
I think
I love that you guys are intertwining your new life, but it obviously doesn't erase what's happened in your life before with your previous spouse. So that's it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, we've talked often on our podcast on Happy Chaos about the dynamic of like understanding that our life did, like, we like to say it this way, like we hate the words move on. Like, we did not move on.
Yeah.
We move
Totally.
forward.
Forward.
So there's this part of us that like built who we are today, and then we're moving forward with that. Like, you always carry that with you. You know, you carry your experiences with you, where you've worked or what you've done, the kids that you've had, you know, all those experiences. And for us, that includes now widowhood.
Yeah.
That we carry widowhood with us. People say to us all the time, they will literally look at the comments of our short videos and people are like, "You're not widows anymore." And I'm like, no, we're not living in a state of widowhood, but like that part of us
it's shaped who we are.
Yeah. Like literally our worldview is shaped by that experience.
Yeah.
So every part of it.
Yeah.
All right. So hardest part, here's what I would give you for hardest part. I believe that the hardest part is that marriage is already hard, right? You double the grief. You double the trauma experience. Like, you come into it knowing that, like, if I could say it this way, I hope this doesn't feel insulting, but like, you double the baggage.
Yeah.
I've got baggage.
Yeah.
She's got baggage.
Yeah.
So here's an example. My late wife passed, and that is the date of one of our children's birthdays.
A daughter that I brought in.
So the date that my wife passed is now our new daughter. So I've got like the date. It's like a date that I wish I didn't have to keep reliving, but you just can't help it. I'm telling you, you know, I've been through it 4 times now, and every time I come up to it, a couple of days prior, a week prior, I start feeling a certain way. I can feel it coming on. And so now I'm trying to like celebrate a birthday for a child who deserves to be celebrated. It's it should be a fun time for a child. But yet I'm also like wanting to be like, hey, can I just go shut the door and be in the room and not talk to anybody for a little bit? And so,
that's so real. Yeah.
And so, just put those two together, that like we double the baggage. And so that it's not a worst, but it definitely is a hardest, because whatever baggage, you normally would carry, you've just put on, oh, well, now there's this widowhood. And so that means, I don't know, there's kind of this like trauma timeline that I tell myself, like, don't think about that. But then it happens, like August comes around and I'm thinking this is when she was diagnosed, and, Christmas comes around and you just have those feelings that come. So doubled baggage, I think, is probably the hard part.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've got double the dates to, celebrate, but grieve and feel.
Yeah, I did want to ask on that. So, one of the big challenges when milestones come up after loss for just about everyone is like, I'm no longer looking forward to Easter, to Christmas, New Year, those big calendar events. How has that just shifted? I mean, did you still celebrate those anyway after losing each of your spouses, and it was not a big scenario? Or has that shifted now with love and family, where you're all looking forward to those things, even though Jonathan and Sarah aren't here? Like, how does that feel and fit?
I think, year number 1 is always extreme when it comes to grief. You're dealing with first. It's the first time you're going to pass a birthday and they're not going to be there. It's the first time that you're going to have a Christmas or an Easter or a Thanksgiving. And then you have the awkward scenario where you're now the third wheel. You go and everybody else who's couples, your brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws are all there, and you don't have somebody with you. And you're all going to go play bunco, and you're supposed to have, your spouse with you. And then everybody realizes, oh, whoops, like this was a game we used to all play together. And now we just said, and you're like, and then, I'm just speaking, here's real life experience. Like, oh no, it's okay. Like, y'all go ahead and go play. And like, no, we'll pick another game. And, so there's just that awkward part of life that the first year you have to get through. For me, that was that whole, like, do the thing you don't want to do. I have 6 children. We already lost mom. They don't need to have the memory that dad canceled Christmas that year too. And so I remember like putting Christmas lights on the house, and, you know, here I am like weeping. I'm sure anybody driving down the road's like, that guy's crying on his roof. You know, I'm like weeping on the top of the house, like putting up Christmas lights. But in my mind, it was like, you know, don't do that to your children. Don't make them have something else that's hard. And we always talked about mom. So when her birthday comes around, or when Christmas came around, like I made it a point to say, you know, like, oh, mom would have loved this, or mom, you know, what mom would have thought of that. And so we've always tried to like include, and I think you all did the same, you know, we've always tried to include our late spouses into the daily conversations. It's hard to do, but once you kind of get through the awkward beginnings of that, it becomes it's always now. I mean, here's a shining light of grief, is that it does paint the person you lost in the best light. I rarely talk about the negative times. I was married for 18 years. We certainly had fights. There were hard times, but my brain does not really remember those. My brain remembers her world famous chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah, that's an incredible perspective. Yeah. In hindsight, right? Like in hindsight, because in the moment it's heated and you're like, how could I ever, I'll remember that. But
yeah,
you just treat life so differently after you lose it.
Yeah. You see somebody so differently. So what was your experience?
Yeah.
I would just leave you with that for a second before I answer the rest of it. Like with, you know, holidays coming up, and when you were with the girls at first.
I think it was more of a, like, it was hard. It was just hard. I didn't really want to celebrate those days because I just kept, I mean, kind of like a pity party. And I hate to use that because, I mean, how can you not be having a pity party? But it was like a, you know, here I am. I was in a loving marriage, but now I have to do Christmas with these girls by myself, like here in Florida. I don't have a huge support system. I don't have in-laws that I'm going to because there wasn't great relations on that side. And so it was just a very lonely time. And I think that's what pushed me more too and quicker to want to be married, because I wanted that connection. I wanted to do life with somebody, and I didn't want to do it alone. And I also wanted my girls, I didn't want them growing up to see this is what life is like. And then they find it weird when they're in a relationship and like, well, it's not supposed to be like this, mom. You know, I didn't see her with a man. I didn't see the way a man should be treating my mom, you know, and I really, really wanted that. So it was just lonely. I think that's the word that I would use for every holiday that came up. It was very lonely.
So then we got engaged. We really haven't talked to you guys our story about getting engaged, but we got engaged in November of last year. So this is 25. Yeah. We got engaged in November of 24. I proposed. It's on Instagram. I made a little.
Yeah, it's on everywhere. Yeah, it was one of the most beautiful 90-second reels that I saw in that year. It was just so incredible. So everyone should go and watch that.
It was so perfect. Best engagement.
And just so y'all know,
show me that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the way we did it, the way I did that was I went over to her house when she was not home. And I made this one video where I literally like made it known, like, you know, I've met this woman and we've fallen in love and she's a widow. And I like pulled the ring box out of my pocket and I go up to the door and I get on one knee. Well, she's not home. And I knocked on the door. I made that video without her home. I have it saved on my phone. And I used to do this thing where I would post a reel and I would text Kelly and be like, hey, check my reel. Tell me what you think about it. And then she would text me back. So I waited. And then when she was home, I went over to her house and I took all the kids with me. And they're lined. What you can't see in that video is all the kids are lined up behind us, with the exception of my oldest wasn't able to be there, but they're all lined up behind us. And so I now go and get in that same position. And we posted the video. I'm like on my knee at the door. We post the video. And I texted Kelly and said, hey, Kelly, check my reel. So she live was looking at her phone in her house and she sees me go up to her door. And then I'm like knocking on her door in real life, I'm knocking on her door. She's watching the reel and I'm knocking on her door. She opens up the door, and then that's when you see that second reel, and she's like, holding her mouth, and, she's crying. And, it's a really like beautiful moment. It was totally like, that was really her reaction. Like she saw, like, she did not know that was coming. That was totally a surprise. That was in November. And then, and so like at first my daughter was there. My daughter said, at the time she was 21, 20.
Yeah, 21.
Yeah. And she said, and anyway, so she said, so when are y'all going to get married? It was like the first thing, first question. And Kelly says May 25th, 25. So that would be 5/25/25. That's what she popped off with. And the whole room we all just got silent and looked at her, and we're like, you want to wait that many? Like, you want to wait? I mean, y'all just don't know. She's not patient like that.
No, I'm not.
And then you could see it like kind of come over, like reality set in, and she's like, what are you doing tomorrow? And so we're having this discussion. I promise I'm coming back to the holiday thing that you had asked. That we'd had this discussion about where the date should be. And what we decided was we didn't want to wait to get married. We're both widowed. We understand how brief life is. I remember saying to Kelly, I was like, Sarah was diagnosed, and from the time she was diagnosed until the time she passed is the time we're talking about potentially waiting to get married.
Yeah.
There's that ratio again that I'm like, hey, I don't want to wait. Like, you don't want to wait. We love each other. Yeah. We want to get married. But we wanted to have enough time to be able to like plan a wedding and buy a dress and do all those things. And so, trying to figure that out. But so we'd come up with a few dates. And one of the deciding factors was when we get married, there's kind of a excitement to that, and a newness and a freshness. And if we do that before Christmas, then we'll have that new, fresh experience, and we'll get that at Christmas. If we wait till the first of the year, then we'll end up with 12 months together, and it won't, like, there's no way that next Christmas could be as exciting as kind of this moment right now. And so, for us, it was like, let's make that exciting. So we chose to get married in January. We got married right at a month later. We got married.
We decided to get married in December.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It was November, and we decided to get married in December so that we could have that first Christmas together right after we got married. And it was just a really beautiful.
And that was a big deciding factor too. We wanted to wake up Christmas morning together as a family.
Yeah. With all the kids. And that, when you've got as many kids as we have in our house, to get up on Christmas morning, I don't care if you get everybody 2 gifts each. That's a whole lot of presents under the tree.
Honestly, all I can imagine is Home Alone. That's all I'm picturing on Christmas morning. But more joy, less fights. I don't know if that's true, but
it's totally true. Yeah. I mean, it was a very big, beautiful, sweet moment of all of us together. My older daughters who are moved out, they brought their significant others, and they came over Christmas morning, and we all opened up gifts, and we had a big pancake breakfast. And it was a really wonderful, sweet time. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that we chose to do that. So in answer to the question, it went from, first year, it's do the thing you don't want to do. And then in, the year that we got married, it was, how much joy and life is brought back into this thing that was 4 years ago was the most hard thing, one of the most hard things you're going through. And then, now it's this beautiful, sweet moment because you now have each other. Mm-hmm. There still been times that, we are sad even though we're married to each other? Are there times that we're sad about the loss of our spouse? Of course it happens, but we get that with each other.
Yeah.
I had a pastor say to me one time, he said that when Jesus was on the boat, and remember when he calmed the waves and the seas when he's on the boat, and he made this comment. He said, Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. And he said, look, you're going to go through a storm. The question is, do you want to be in the boat with Jesus or not? You want to go through it alone, or do you want to have him with you? And I feel the same way with Kelly and our marriage. Like, you're going to go through the grief. Do you want to do it alone, or do you want to do it with somebody? And so when you have somebody that you're with that understands that, it changes the dynamic of like what it used to feel like, where it used to feel very lonely going through it. Now I feel like, well, like the proverb, there's a 3 braided cord now. Now it's not just, me and the Lord, it's me and Kelly and the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And so a 3 braided cord is not easily broken.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. You guys are such a shining example of what's possible when you lean into your faith, and also what doors God opens. And like, I think we've just got to do a part 2, and maybe we jump on your podcast on Happy Chaos and we continue the
Okay.
conversation.
I'm going to
I'm
need
just
you to
inviting
teach me the
myself,
technology.
Yes.
we can make it happen. But honestly, there's so many takeaways from this conversation for me personally, but I know in our audience how supportive this type of open conversation is going to be. So I just want to thank you and honor you both and your stories, and just know that it's going to be touching hearts all over the world. And
thanks for being so raw and real.
yeah. And so we just want to say thank you. We'll put a not the end, but to be continued on this, because there's more, and we're excited for what you guys have got in store.
Yeah.
But
and there's going to be more that you guys learn that you can share with us down
For sure.
the
Yeah.
future.
you're going to be joining us in a couple of weeks inside of our Good Grief Club to speak to our women and members inside of there. And so once they've listened into this conversation, I'm kind of inceptioning what's to come. They're going to bring so many questions for you guys. So get ready. I'll just say get ready. They're the most incredible, supportive tribe and family that we've had the pleasure of being a part of. And so we look forward to seeing you inside there. But I'm going to pop your podcast below, your socials below, all of that. Thank you both very much. And you guys are welcome to go get some sleep over in Kentucky. It's getting late, and we appreciate you.
Yes.
Well, we appreciate you guys. Thank you for having us on. We've really enjoyed it.
And maybe we'll have to plan a trip
You're
there.
To Australia?
Oh, please.
Oh.
100%.
It goes without saying.
Our house is
only
open.
if I get to learn how to surf.
Totally.
We can make that happen.
Our house is open for the 2 of you, but not for the 9 of you. It won't fit, all right?
We couldn't afford 9 plane tickets there, so.
Not yet. Not
Yeah.
yet.
That's right.
Bless you guys.
Thank you.
And if you found this episode helpful, we just would ask that you would rate the episode. If you've made it all the way to the end, you're like one of our heroes. And so just rate the episode. And we just want to say we're praying for you. We love you, and we'll see you on the next episode. So bye from us.
Big love.